are one, what are the sources for new creative business ideas? Creative visionaries, lead users, and talking to customers are often fertile sources for new ideas. Second, that there are certain ways of organizing that can lead to increased group creativity. There are certain processes for brainstorming that can enable it to generate more and higher quality new ideas. Finally, we want to think a bit about the purpose of creativity within a startup. And that is, how many areas within the company do you want to be doing something new? Well, in the first place, creativity can help you come up with the invention, can help you come up with a new idea for the product or service. But creativity is also useful on the execution side and on the business side. There are going to be challenges in bringing this technology or this idea to market. And so these business challenges, whether they be sales, marketing, distribution, fundraising, are going to require creative solutions as well. And so creativity is going to come in at each and every part of the process. And so I want to give you some framework and some ability to improve your brainstorming and creativity skills. Processes for brainstorming that can enable it to generate more and higher quality new ideas. Finally, we want to think a bit about the purpose of creativity within a startup. And that is, how many areas within the company do you want to be doing something new? With the invention, it can help you come up with a new idea for the product or service. But creativity is also useful on the execution side and on the business side. There are going to be challenges in bringing this technology or this idea to market. And so these business challenges, whether they be sales, marketing, distribution, fundraising, are going to require creative solutions as well. And so creativity is going to come in at each and every part of the process. And so I want to give you some framework and some ability to improve your brainstorming and creativity skills. This community is really supporting one another and innovating. You can see how they're encouraging each other on to be creative. And so I hope this is also partly what this class can provide to you. A community of peers who can help encourage you in your entrepreneurial ventures. Each week you'll be giving updates, and the rest of the class and your peers can see what you're doing in your entrepreneurial ventures, what creative solutions you've come across, and hopefully become inspired by that with their own ventures. I'm also going to give you a new formula for venture performance. And this formula is that venture performance is about product development, customer development, team building, and luck. So in addition to develop and build the set of customers that you're going to sell it to. But how do we know what product to build and what set of customers we should target? This leads to the next step in the formula, which is that venture performance is about your learning rate plus product and customer development, along with the characteristics of the team, and of course a bit of luck. And so this learning rate has to be quick enough to learn enough about what product customers want and who those customers are for the venture to be successful. So let's talk about this in a bit more detail, from being a small startup to being a large, established, successful company. And so how do we go about this discovery process? What methodology should we use? I mentioned earlier, this term, the pivot, has become so ingrained in the startup world and startup culture in Silicon Valley that there's even starting to be comics and satire about it. So anyway, back to the scientific method. Here's another version. And in this version, we start again by asking some question. So, do customers want this product? Or would this new startup idea be successful? You then do some background research. So we'll talk a bit about what background research would look like in the world of entrepreneurship and startups. You then construct a hypothesis, and again test that hypothesis with an experiment. Once you've done the experiment, you can then analyze what the results are and draw a conclusion. So again, this conclusion might either be true, or the conclusion might be false, or partially true. And in that case, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board, think again, modify the hypothesis in some way, or come up with a new hypothesis, and design a new experiment. And so this is the scientific methodology. This is the scientific process that we want to then take in an analogous form to entrepreneurship that we need to think about in going through the startup process. And so when you start to think about applying customer development and this methodology in your own venture, which aspects of your business model are the most risky, the most uncertain? Which aspects are the most novel? Which piece of your business model is the most important to get right? Is it the technology? Is it the set of customers? Is it a key partner? Think through these within your own venture, and we'll talk more about the next steps.
We found out that they urgently needed XYZ feature that we just didn't have in our plan. So we had to be really flexible, and now we only plan like 2 or 3 weeks out.
So isn't that short-term vision kind of in conflict of having a long-term vision for the company?
I don't think they necessarily are.
How so?
Like, we have a long-term, very high-level broad vision. We want to help every business owner better manage and improve their finances. And whether that means going down the path of building accounting software or replacing bookkeepers and accountants or whatever, that's just a high-level vision. But the low level of how to get there is the hard part.
And did that cause any conflict with engineering if we wanted to build this perfect code?
Yeah, it's really tough because what customers want isn't necessarily what you or your engineering team wants to build. Like surveys, we found out that they urgently needed XYZ feature that we just didn't have in our plan. So we had to be really flexible, and now we only plan like 2 or 3 weeks out.
So isn't that short-term vision kind of in conflict of having a long-term vision for the company?
I don't think they necessarily are.
How so?
Like, we have a long-term, very high-level broad vision. We want to help every business owner better manage and improve their finances. And whether that means going down the path of building accounting software or replacing bookkeepers and accountants or whatever, that's just a high-level vision. But the low level of how to get there is the hard part.
And did that cause any conflict with engineering if we wanted to build this perfect code?
Yeah, it's really tough because what customers want isn't necessarily what you or your engineering team wants to build. Like, some of these features are really, really, really unsexy. Like, financial statements and stuff, I think they're awesome. But, like, they're not necessarily that exciting.
That was Steve Blank interviewing Jessica Ma, the co-founder of Indinero. And you can see how she was emphasizing talking to customers and getting feedback from those customers and having that inform the product development process. And so you can see in what she's talking about this hypothesis testing framework that we were just discussing. She was being interviewed by Steve Blank, who has written a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany and writes a blog at steveblank.com. He's developed a lot of these ideas behind customer development and lean startups. That's it for this video. In the next video, I'll talk more about customer development and hypothesis testing.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu. Stanford University.
So welcome back to E145, Technology Entrepreneurship. In this next video in the Customer Development series, I'd like to introduce an entrepreneur, Jason Friedman. He is a co-founder of Flightcaster and is now doing his next startup, 42 Floors. And I'm excited to have him talk to you a bit more detail about some of the lessons he's learned as a successful entrepreneur.
I want to spend a few minutes with you guys today and just give you 3 brief stories, each of which showed a lesson on how I built my last companies. I've been an entrepreneur for 4 years. I've had some successes and some failures, and I don't know, we all go through the same process, so hopefully this will be helpful to you. Please feel free to reach out to me. I give you my contact information here. Would love to be helpful to you as you guys build your companies. When your name's in TechCrunch and the word acquires is there, it's generally a pretty good thing. and we got acquired. Flightcaster got acquired after several years of building it, and it was pretty awesome, especially after we had failed several times as a team before. Before we talk about what made it work with Flightcaster, let's back up and I'll show you a bright young entrepreneur, age 18, freshman at a university, who really thought that the most important product that anyone could ever want was a loft. And so I built Student Lofts. This was an outstanding company, and for those of you building technologies that will change the world, I applaud you. But at 18, what I thought was most important was helping people put their beds 6 feet above so that they could fit a couch below in their college dorm room. And Student Lofts was probably the best beginning of a company I've ever done, because all it was a problem that needed to be solved and had a super simple solution that I could then provide and charge money for. And we really get caught up in disruptive technologies and network effects and trying to create moats around what we build and how are we going to create the next big thing. But at their core, all companies have one fundamental thing in common, and that is that you are solving a problem with a product that people want. And Flightcaster, when we did that, was Y Combinator funded, and Paul Graham, the head of Y Combinator, he makes us wear these shirts that have this one fundamental lesson, which is make something people want. And everything else you do, if you're talking about venture capital or fundraising or advisory boards or how you're integrating new technology, recently been in your shoes. I like to think of 18 months as the ideal startup advisor timeframe. 18 months ahead of you means if you're just starting your company now, maybe your advisor just raised their Series A or just hit product market fit. Or if you've already raised your Series A, then your advisor just raised their Series B. They're only a couple steps in front of you. And so the names on this
or some alternative views. In some ways, the idea that you have to listen to and respond to feedback from customers is almost obvious advice. But we also have this famous quote that's attributed to Henry Ford, where he said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So apparently Henry Ford never actually said this, but nonetheless, there is this idea that customers don't necessarily know or can't necessarily think of these breakthrough next generation innovations. And so the other argument that's given is the argument from Apple and Steve Jobs, that Steve Jobs was this brilliant visionary who would never assemble a group of customers for a customer feedback session or elicit ideas from them. The argument is that, again, radical new products. In the early days, it was forecast that we might need perhaps 10 computers. And so when you have something as radically new as the first desktop computer, it can be difficult for people to imagine how they might use it and thus to give these kinds of ideas to customers. There's this idea that perhaps rather than listening too closely to customers, that it might be good to actually have a vision, to actually not necessarily listen to customers, but trust your gut instinct. Start paying attention to certain startup metrics. So what are these metrics for startups? In a large company, the relevant metrics that you might look at are things like the cash flow statement, income, profit and loss statement. But as you can imagine, for a startup, most of these things are going to be zero. You have very little revenue, you're making losses. How do you tell if you're actually making progress? If the time has come to raise additional capital and begin building out the organization? There's a different set of metrics for a startup, and you'll have to think through your own venture and the industry that you're in to know exactly which set is right for you. But these things might be things that are characteristics of your user base. Things like the number of registrations or the number of activations. What percentage of people who land on your website are actually signing up or downloading the software? How many of these customers do you retain for at least 30 days or for at least 90 days? How many of them switch over to become paying customers? The level of cash that you have is certainly key in a startup. You can't survive if you're running out of cash. Your burn rate, how much cash are you burning per month? Or they might be customer acquisition metrics, things like What does it cost you to acquire a new customer? What are your advertising expenses? What's your viral acquisition ratio? So for each customer that you get,